Madam President, I rise today to urge this body to protect the Constitution, to defend the separation of powers, and to prevent an unauthorized, unconstitutional war with Iran. The Constitution is clear. Under our Article 1 powers, the Constitution spells out that Congress shall have the authority to declare war. The founders debated which branch of government should be given the solemn power to wage war. Entering into battle had been the personal prerogative of kings, and kings had shown that they would bankrupt their countries and risk lives because of self-serving, power-seeking feuds. Therefore, our Constitution's founders placed the decision to go to war with the people's representatives. They wanted any decision to wage war to reflect the will of the people. They deliberately rejected giving this most consequential decision only to the President. Yet despite the clarity of the Constitution, President Trump insists, without any equivocation, that he does not need congressional approval to engage in military hostilities against Iran. And now, instead of working with the United States Congress, he is publicly deferring to the royal family of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Our president said that we are waiting for Saudi Arabia to say, and I quote here, under what terms we would proceed, end quote. When discussing retaliation for the attack on Saudi oil processing facility, our president has praised the Saudis as good customers who, quote, pay cash. President Trump explained further, and I quote, the fact is that the Saudis are going to have a lot of involvement in this if we decide to do something. They'll be very much involved, and that includes payment, and they understand that fully, end quote. Does this Congress think that the patriotic men and women of our military are mercenaries at the service of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? I reject that idea completely. When a president is threatening a military attack because of a foreign king's oil interests, it is well past time for Congress to assert its constitutional authority. Congress needs to make it clear the president cannot begin a war with Iran without coming here first, coming here to the Congress. In June, we voted on a bipartisan amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act that prohibited any war with Iran unless authorized by Congress. Getting a vote on the Udall-Kane-Paul amendment was historic, and a bipartisan majority of senators voted to support our amendment that day. The House of Representatives have sent us its NDAA, which includes a bipartisan provision prohibiting war against Iran without congressional approval. The NDAA is now going to a Senate-House Conference Committee. The Conference Committee must adopt our amendment that prohibits unauthorized war against Iran. Since our vote in June, tensions with Iran have not subsided. They have only increased. The threat of miscalculation and unauthorized war has only gotten more serious. This week, the president on Twitter is threatening that the United States military is, quote, locked and loaded on behalf of the Saudi kingdom. Iran's behavior in the region is highly problematic. But Saudi Arabia's oil interests do not determine whether the United States goes to war. Congress determines that. Congress and Congress only, based on our national interests. Rather than threats of war, the right move is active diplomacy to lower tensions in the region. We are at this point in the Middle East because of the Trump administration's failed policies. Its unilateral withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement, its maximum pressure policy, its abandonment of diplomacy. These policies are only causing more chaos in the region and doing nothing to advance U.S. interest. When the President unilaterally withdrew from the Iran agreement in May 2018 against the advice of his military and intelligence chiefs, he promised he would get us a better deal. The deal we had in place secured for the U.S. and the world an Iran that would not develop nuclear weapons. It was a deal that had strict verification requirements, and a deal his advisors and outside independent groups said Iran was complying with. It has now been 16 months since the President tore up that deal and said he could get us a better one. Well, the President's supposed deal-making prowess has only produced increased tensions, bringing us to the brink of war. In June, we were 10 minutes away from an attack that likely would have cost Iranian lives. Even after that aborted strike, the President threatened Iran with, quote, obliteration like you've never seen before, end of the President's quote. Now we are, quote, locked and loaded. Well, it's a positive development that John Bolton is no longer whispering in the President's ear, urging regime change in Iran. This mercurial President could get us into a war before we know it. But these are my own views about the President's foreign policy. I understand that others in this body do not share them, including others who voted to support this amendment previously. I want to underscore, this is not about what you think of the President. This is about defending the separation of powers as outlined in the Constitution. And this is about standing up for the will of the American people. The American people do not want another endless war in the Middle East. While our military is the most capable on earth, no conflict with Iran would be easy. Iran has twice the population of Iraq and is 4 times the size. Even so-called targeted strikes could escalate into a much wider war. But make no mistake, our amendment retains the President's authority to defend against any attack upon us. While the chief complaint from opponents of the amendment was that it tied the President's hands from attack, this is a false argument. The amendment expressly reserves the President's powers to defend the nation. The Department of Defense's rules of engagement remain in place. The President's full authority as Commander-in-Chief to repel an attack and defend the nation remains intact. If there are still concerns, we can continue to consult experts and refine language in conference. That's part of the regular order. But the defense bill must prohibit an unauthorized war with Iran. Madam President, for too long, Congress has abdicated its constitutional duty to decide matters of war and peace. We have hidden from the hard votes. We have allowed the executive to fill the vacuum. We in this body need to step up to the plate and assume our constitutional responsibilities. This is not about partisan politics. This is not about tying the hands of the President in defense of our country. This vote is not even about whether you think we should or should not go to war against Iran. Even if you think military action on behalf of the downed drone or Saudi oil is justified, the place to debate and make that decision is here on this floor in this Congress. It is not the decision of one man in the White House. So I'm making this call to our conferees. Affirm the Constitution, affirm our sworn responsibility to uphold the Constitution, and affirm that our men and women in uniform will not be sent off to risk their lives in war unless the people's representatives make that somber decision.